What is going on, guys? Serious here. In today's video, we are starting the 12th part in the GSC scripting series. Now, if you are not familiar with the series, basically we are going over GSC scripting principles and kind of teaching you the lay of the land when it comes to scripting in GSC. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be the same typical we just write code and explain stuff. We're actually going to do a little bit of a Blackboard explanation on the problem because today we're talking about overflow fixes and string overflows, and I feel like it's kind of a complex topic. Now, if you are not interested in knowing all of the nitty-gritty stuff, you can skip straight to the code demonstration. I'll leave a timestamp in the description. If you are interested in it, we're going to try this is basically my first time playing around with this Blackboard idea, so might be a little bit messy, but I'm going to do my best to kind of explain this issue and why it's relevant. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into the issue. Basically, whenever you are setting text on a text element, you are going to basically be using the configstring table. Now, the configstring table is basically how the host tells all of the players what is basically on the server. So like, you know how in GSC it's running on the server? Well, the server needs to tell the players about the text somehow, and the way they do that is with a config string table. Now, really quickly, let's pretend we're setting our option to, say, God mode. What's going to happen is the server is going to say, okay, we want to use set text. So it's going to add this config string to the table, and this config string is going to get sent to all of the players. All the players are going to get this God mode string, and then their text elements are going to update and synchronize with the server. And so what happens is, as you get more and more options, you start to fill up the config string table. And you keep going, you get more and more options, and then all of a sudden, you run out of space. And so when you try to set text again, you go outside of the config string table, you run out of bounds, and you will get a string overflow error when that happens. So the issue is basically that if you use too many strings in your menu, things are going to overflow. Now, if you're using the menu-based tutorial that we already did, or you're using my utility GSC, or really most menu bases nowadays, this is already going to be handled and this is already going to be dealt with. But if you were starting with like an old base or it's your own base, you're going to need to handle the overflow issue. And your first thought will be, can we increase the string size, or the string table size? Could we maybe get rid of some strings? Maybe I need to optimize my menu. Really, the golden solution here is a special function called clear all text after HUD LM. Clear all text after HUD LM is going to rely on an anchor string, and this anchor string is going to go before the first text that you have. And what will happen is, as the name suggests, whenever you call it, it is going to then clear all of the strings after the text element. So we get rid of all our strings, and once we get all our strings out of the table, the string table is empty. But you might be wondering, well, how can our text element still, know what it is? And the answer is it can't. What will happen is your text element is going to clear itself because there is no longer a string where it expects a string to be. So the text element is going to just be completely empty. And that's why we have to be able to redraw our strings whenever we call this function. You want to store whatever the string value was, and most people will resort, there's a few different approaches to it. The most common approach is to basically redraw all of your menu text every time this function is called. And that's all right. That's, it works. It does make your menu a little bit harder to manage, so I don't really recommend doing that way. There's another way that's done pretty common, and basically what they do is they thread a function on all of the elements and tell it whenever it gets that overflow to redraw whatever its text was. And again, that's a pretty good solution, but the problem is that it runs a ton of script threads. And so I'm going to show you my solution here in a minute, but I just want to basically show you well, actually, I think we're good to go on this diagram. Hopefully everything made sense. This is my first time doing this kind of thing, so hopefully you guys understand it. But we're going to go ahead and head over to Infinity Loader so that I can demonstrate the issue and the fix that I have created and then you guys can basically decide on how you want to do it for your own menu, or you can just use my utility. Or for Black Ops 2, you can use GSX, which has it built in. So we've got Infinity Loader open, and the code that we're going to need to write to test our overflow is pretty basic. I'm going to go ahead and add an option here, which is going to be added to the main menu, and we're going to call it Overflow menu. Then we're going to do test overflow, which is going to be our new function. Test overflow, I'm just going to put down here, this is bad practice, but for the purposes of this video, it doesn't really matter. Is my Razor Synapse not working? My Razor Synapse is not working. Okay, so the test we're going to do is we are basically going to create a text element. So we'll do text equals text. This text function is from my GSC utility. So if you are not familiar with this series, I have a GSC utility for Modern Warfare 3 and Modern Warfare 2, and I have a text function down here. The text function is already going to have a where is this? The text function is already going to have the overflow fix built into it, but it doesn't matter because we're going to force use set text and force the overflow. So I'm just going to make it an empty string because we don't actually care what the starter text is. Then we are going to go into the X and Y and just put it to 0. We're going to use a default font. And we are going to use like a 2 font scale. The color is going to be white, which is 0xFFFFF. That's too many Fs. FFFFF. The alpha is going to be 1. The sort is going to be like 10 because we want it to be over everything. The align and relative don't matter, and it does not need to be a level string. Okay, so next thing we're going to do, let me go ahead and do self text just to be safe. We are going to go and write a for loop that is going to run forever. I is going to be equal to 0. We don't have any condition here. This could be true. This could be whatever you want. If you keep it empty, it's just going to run forever. And then I++, and we are going to do text, set text. And we are going to tell it to set text to option plus I. Now, keep in mind that if you watch somebody's overflow fix and you only see a number, most of the time they're cheating. They're using something called set value. We don't use set value very often, but it's basically a way to not have to use config strings and worry about an overflow fix, but it only works with numbers. So I like to, whenever I'm demonstrating an overflow issue, use actual text with my number. Then we are going to wait, because if we run an infinite loop without waiting, we are going to crash the game. I'm going to wait 0.05, which should be fast enough for the numbers to increase quickly and give us an overflow. Let me go ahead and check our syntax. Our syntax looks good. I think this entire function is going to be fine. We'll go ahead and compile and inject the project. And what's going to happen whenever we run the game is we'll get our menu, we'll get our options, whatever, everything's going to be fine. But when we click our overflow option, it's going to loop infinitely and keep setting the text and keep filling up that config string table. In the example I showed, we only had like 12 strings. Modern Warfare 3 has like 200 strings. So it's not going to fill up that fast, but if you're running the game for a while and multiple people have the menu or you're going through a lot of options, you're going to overflow really fast. So we're going to go ahead and tap our overflow option, and you can see it's starting to fill up. It's gone through 80 strings, 120 strings, and when that number hits about 240, I think, the game's going to crash. Oh, no, it's a little bit more than that. Let's see. There we go, 291. It kicks us out. G find config string index overflow, 469. And that basically is going to be that, like I showed in that example, where the number of strings exceeds the size of the table. So the way I handled this in my menu, and the way I handled it in my utility, is I have a special function called bind config string. And what this does is this goes into the this is basically going to add the string that we are setting the text to an array, so we can keep track of the number of strings we have. It's going to add the HUD element to an array as well, so we can keep track of the HUDs that need to be updated whenever we overflow. Then we're going to do a self.text variable so we can keep track of the string that it needs. And if the number of strings we have is greater than our overflow cat, which is just a variable we have up here, I put it down to 60. I'll explain why in a minute. But just basically pretend that that's 60 whenever you're looking at the example. The level is going to notify overflow, and it's not going to set the text. Otherwise, we're going to use a setText function and tell the level that there's new text. Now, there is some stuff going on in the background that you can't see, and that is actually down here. This is run on the init of the script, and we are going to end it whenever the game ends, because obviously we don't want this running after the game ends. And we are going to use a special string for our anchor text. Now, if you remember, we actually have a anchor text, and that anchor text comes before any of the options we set. So whenever we're setting these options, this anchor text is set before. So if you look back on our code, you can actually see that we have this random string, because if somebody is using that actual text, it's going to break the entire thing. So you need to have a very unique overflow string. Anyway, we are going to then create a server font string, which is just for the entire level, because we're going to immediately delete this. But we need to use the setText function one time on our anchor text, because we need this anchor text to be added to the configstring table. If we don't use setText, this anchor text string is never going to be added to the string table, and clear all text after HUD element isn't going to work because it doesn't know, it doesn't have a string to use for that HUD element. So we just want to make sure that we have our anchor text set, and then we can destroy the text, because the text doesn't actually need to exist anymore. We just need that config string inside of the table. Then we are going to go ahead and initialize our two arrays that we use. The HUDs is for the real HUD elements that we're keeping track of, or our text elements. And then we have the unique strings array, which is going to keep track of the number of strings that we're using. And for an infinite loop, we are going to call this xTextMonitor. Notice we are not threading it because we want this to actually run, and when it exits, we're going to remove all of the undefined values from our array. This remove undefined is just a function that I wrote for my utility, where it just basically goes through every array element and adds, or basically removes anything that's undefined from it. That's useful because we don't want undefined HUD elements in an array, otherwise our text monitor will run into some issues. And the text monitor is going to end when the game ends, and it's going to end on this new text string. You guys saw that notify before, and then this notify is going to basically tell this function that it needs to go ahead and quit. Because whenever there's new text, we need to re-update this call right here, which is basically saying end the function whenever any HUD dies. So whenever a HUD is destroyed, whenever you call that destroy method, what will happen is the HUD will receive a notification called death. And when the HUD dies, we want this function to exit, because it's going to need to go ahead and redraw, or basically remove any of the dead HUDs from the array. Again, this is just some really, really optimized code at this point. This overflow fix has gone through about 7 versions. Over the years, it's gotten really complicated and then really simple again. So a lot of this stuff is really optimized, and you might see different overflow fixes in different menus, but you can go ahead and hopefully probably copy and paste this overflow fix into your own menu for any game. The only thing you'll really have to change is some of the syntax. Anyway, then we keep waiting for the overflow, basically saying just go ahead and chill until the string table is about to overflow. Now, of course, this isn't a real overflow. If you put the string count at the actual overflow count, and your game overflows, well, then the overflow fix is kind of pointless, isn't it? So you want your overflow to be lower than the maximum number of strings, so that you do a fake overflow, and you're going to tell your function that you've overflowed. And then what's going to happen is we're going to use the first HUD element in the array. This is just a placeholder. You could create a new HUD element, but I think that's dangerous, because if you've got too many HUD elements on the screen and that HUD element actually doesn't exist, the setText call will not work, and your overflow fix will not work, and you'll overflow your menu. So I just like to use the first HUD element. This is also kind of dangerous, because if there's no HUD element on the screen, then this won't work, but I don't think it's actually possible for this overflow to actually get called when there aren't any HUD elements on the screen, because of the way the overflow works. So I think this is fine. But we're going to set it to the anchor text so that the clear all text after HUD element can be called on our actual HUD element. So basically it's going to update, let's say this HUD element was pointing to God mode. When we call the set text, it's now going to be pointing to our anchor text so that we can clear all of the strings after it. And when that happens, we need to go ahead and redraw all of our HUD. So what we do is we clear the original string array, which is just keeping track of all the unique strings we're using, and we go ahead and iterate through all of the HUD elements we have. And if the HUD isn't defined, we'll continue because we don't want to operate on a dead HUD. And if the HUD does not have its text variable set, then it was incorrectly set, and this HUD element needs to not be redrawn because we don't know what to redraw it to. Otherwise, we are going to add that unique string back to our unique strings array so that we can keep track of it, and we are going to set it to its original text. And so what ends up happening is, if we use the correct method now, which is bind configstring instead of set text in our test function, so instead of set text, we use bind configstring. I forgot my Razor Synapse isn't working. I have copy and paste bound on my mouse, so whenever Synapse is not running, I can't copy and paste with my mouse, so things are kind of weird. But we can go ahead and compile and inject this, and now we're going to hopefully get good syntax. Nothing really changed. Apparently GIMP is still detecting my mouse, which is pretty funny. Now we are going to spawn in and run our overflow, and what should happen is it should get past that 300 boundary and be totally fine. So we're starting to climb up. We get to 200. Get to 240, get to 290, and we're well over 300. We're still good. And I can already tell you this is not going to overflow because it would have overflowed by now. You remember when it overflowed way lower than this? And all this is doing is just basically whenever we run out of strings, we clear it and we redraw the text. And that's the entirety of the overflow fix right there, folks. I mean, this is not really that complicated. The way it works is kind of complicated, but this is one of the biggest things in the modding community as far as menus go for Call of Duty that has always been an issue, and this is really a very simple problem to solve. So hopefully you guys got something out of this video. I do really quickly want to go ahead and mention something because I said I was going to mention it and I didn't. So this overflow cap is really low. It's at 60. In fact, for Black Ops 2, most overflow fixes are at 60 or less. Even if you have like 800 strings available, you'd think, well, why would I want to clear it, every 60 strings if I could clear it every, 800 strings? And the reason is because what happens is every single string in our config string table, whenever it's cleared, it's going to send a specific command to the clients. And what I mean by this is, so let's say that, you know how every time a text element is set, that this text is going to be sent to the client? Well, every time a text element is cleared, it is also going to be set to a client. Which means if you have 800 strings, it is going to send 800 commands to every single player in the game. That's really bad because these are something called reliable commands. Reliable commands are always going to be sent to the client. There is a list of reliable commands, just like there is a list of strings, and those reliable commands are always going to be sent to the player, which means if you have 800 reliable commands pending, the game is going to run out of space, and the game is going to crash with a reliable command overflow. For Black Ops 2, you'll just see server disconnected. You won't see anything else. But it's a reliable command overflow. And so if you have too many strings in your config table that you are clearing, you're going to crash anyway, even if you're doing your clear all text after HUD LM. So you need to keep your string limit pretty low. You don't want it too low, because if you have it too low, what will happen is if you have multiple people with the menu open and they have 10 options each, let's say there's 7 people with the menu, and this is a problem with this menu, but it's just how it is. If 7 players have the menu open and they have 10 options on their screen, and all 10 of those options are unique to each player, so they're each in different submenus, you will infinitely overflow your menu because you don't have enough text space for your menu to run like that. So you have to keep that in mind as well. If your overflow is too low, you won't actually be able to finish drawing the menu for everyone, and you will infinitely overflow. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind as well. So overflow fixes are a pain, but this is an issue with every single Call of Duty game. The only game currently that I know of that does not have this issue is Black Ops 3, and Black Ops 3 will still overflow eventually, but they have no way to fix it. So that is something to keep in mind whenever you're writing a Black Ops 3 or Black Ops 4 menu. I believe Black Ops 4 is the same way because I can't see them just changing their mind and going back to the old methods. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like. Let me know in the comment section below if you have any questions. I know this isn't really much of a typical GSC scripting tutorial, but this is a really big issue that has been a problem in the Call of Duty community for a very long time. I did do a video on it a while ago, but it wasn't very descriptive on how it works. It was really just a way to show that GSX Studio had something like this built in, and hopefully this was a lot more informative. If you guys enjoyed this video style as well, where I do that little blackboard thing, let me know. Or if you just prefer the scripting, like 100% scripting video, then let me know about that as well. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.